Greetings and welcome to the World Numismatic News as we now take a look at various buffalo nickel varieties that are worth looking for. Diving straight in, let's take a look at the most prominent of the various 1930 S over S varieties. All in a fairly straightforward variety coin, or repunched mintmark variety to be more specific. On this coin, the San Francisco Mint's S mintmark was repunched directly towards the west, leaving the remnant of the initial S directly towards the east of the top serif of the S, as well as towards the lower loop of the S in the same position. Now, it is interesting to also note that there is a fairly advanced die crack linked to this variety, extending from just below the U in United, running almost parallel to the rim all the way across the buffalo's head. For this variety, a PCGS graded MS64 coin was sold at auction in 2019 for $384. For our next coin, we head to 1936 to view a double die obverse coin from the Philadelphia Mint this time. Look first towards the word Liberty and you should see an extreme additional thickness on the letters towards the rim. By example, compare here a normal 1936 nickel on your left to the variety coin under discussion on your right, and the difference should become immediately apparent. From there, we can then examine the date where a very similar effect is seen towards the lower halves of the numbers and extending slightly towards the southeast as well. Now, an interesting note to mention about this variety coin is that in later die states, the coin does display clash marks just underneath the chief's chin that are of course not present on earlier die state examples, so keep an eye out for that if you happen to come across one. 2019 saw the auction of a coin like this in a PCGS slab with the grade of MS66 for $3,840. Then let's look at one of the most impressive varieties, I think at least, in the entire series, the 1916 double die obverse. This coin is particularly hallmarked by the strong doubling on the date that almost represents an overdate variety but is in fact die doubling, where the first 1 and 6 are almost completely doubled, and the first two numbers of the date being strongly doubled as well, but with the lower halves of those numbers basically missing. Other doubling can also be identified on the strings of the hair tie. The long feather behind the neck is also doubled towards the east across almost the entire length of the feather. The same can also be said for the chin and lips on the other end of the coin, although perhaps not to quite such a dramatic fashion. And then the neck, or Adam's apple, is also equally doubled in the same effect. A coin which is extremely rare and even more popular with collectors across the board. In 2019, we saw a sale at auction of an MS63 graded example from NGC at the August ANA show for the sum of $105,000. However, if you're willing to go back a little further to 2013, a PCGS graded MS64 example was sold at auction for $253,000. Let's take a look at a variety coin from 1936 with the Denver Mint on call. This is the 1936 D over D repunched mintmark variety. Now, this is not necessarily the most valuable repunched mintmark from 1936, but it is certainly one of the clearest to identify. The initial D mintmark's position is slightly northwest of the final placement, shifting far more more to the west than to the north necessarily in this case. The entire straight bar of the D, as well as especially the top serif, is clearly visible here, and as an added bonus, the rounding of the initial D can also be detected inside the cavity of the final mint mark in some cases. The auction record for this particular coin was set back in 2010, but more recently an MS66 graded coin from PCGS was sold at auction in 2019 for $288. Then we head back a few years to 1931, where the San Francisco Mint produced not only the last nickels to be struck until 1934, but also a very nice little double-die reverse coin in the mix as well. This is a clear instance of offset hub doubling, where the shift towards the left took place between squeezings of the hubbing process. The resulting doubling is thusly seen towards the right of certain of the design elements. The rear-facing leg is one, where the upper leg is doubled towards the right, but mainly where you should be examining this coin is the front-facing leg, or the left leg, I suppose. Again, towards the right or the rear of the leg. This is where the best doubling can be seen on this coin. It may not be immediately apparent also if you don't know exactly what to look for, because of the way that the buffalo's hair is sculpted in this particular area, but a good loop or even a halfway decent scope will make the difference clear in short order. There is more doubling behind, or well, technically I suppose underneath the buffalo's neck as well, but for the same reasons this can be tricky to spot, so I believe at least that it should be reserved as a confirmatory diagnostic instead of a primary one in this case. And speaking of which, there is also a concentric die crack running across the buffalo's head and towards the U of United. In 2019, one of these coins in a PCGS slab with the grade of MS65 was sold at auction for $264, although supposedly an MS66 example also sold on eBay in 2020 for a penny shy of $2,000. And then, one of the most famous variety coins for the series needs little introduction, the 1937 D three-legged buffalo. A quick glance at this coin will reveal the reason for this name, as the front leg is basically missing. The dies overall for this coin are in fairly bad shape, so then it is easy to assume that they were heavily polished, quite possibly to remove clash marks, to the point where the front leg was removed entirely from the design, although you can still see the hoof contacting the ground, as well as the top portion of the leg. Sadly, as these things tend to go, there are many forgeries or altered coins pretending to be the real thing. A genuine coin will have a badly abraded die with plenty of erosion marks. There should also be almost a string of raised dots from the bison's belly all the way towards the ground. In addition, the rear leg should look like it's almost disintegrating to a degree. An extremely valuable coin and a very popular Red Book listed variety as well. An early 2020 coin auction saw one of these coins in a PCGS slab with the grade of MS66 Plus achieve a closing price at auction of $72,000. There is no doubt that this is a variety coin, but the exact nature of the variety does remain the subject of some debate still. A triple punched mint mark, to be sure, it is almost certainly a D over D over D repunched mint mark variety. However, the confusion comes in with the initial striking that was probably placed well towards the northeast, at a slight angle, leaving what is now appears to be the curved middle portion of an S, leading to the belief by some that this is in fact a D over S over mintmark variety instead. Although not impossible by any means, I really have yet to see a truly compelling argument in support of this. 2017 saw the auction of an MS67 example graded by PCGS and sold for $5,875. The next coin up is a lot more straightforward and is the 1929 double-die obverse buffalo nickel. This coin is the result of pivoted hub doubling, which can be seen best on the lower left part of the obverse design. Specifically, the date is where the numbers are doubled quite nicely for the most part towards the southeast, with the 2 as well as the 9 being especially well doubled in this case. There is further doubling to look for as well on areas such as the ends of the ribbons, for example, and you can use these to confirm that what you have is in fact this particular variety coin. In 2019, a PCGS graded MS65 coin matching this description was sold at auction for $660. And then, to conclude this list, we have a nice overdate variety from 1914, specifically the 1914 over 3 buffalo nickel. In order to spot this overdate, examine the 4 of the date. Pay particular attention towards the top of the number, as this should be where the straight top bar of the underlying 3 should be seen. Now, the strength of the initial 3 does vary from coin to coin. With some specimens, the 3 is extremely clear and strong, and then in other cases it is really quite weak, with only the right-hand side of it really showing to any specific degree. In 2017, a PCGS graded coin with a grade of MS65 was sold at auction for the sum of $18,212.50. 1936 harbors an absolutely beautiful repunched mintmark variety from San Francisco, and a coin that is very rare and difficult to find in grades really above extremely fine, and consequently holds a healthy premium above the base coin itself, which within itself is a fairly common date for the series with almost 15 million coins minted. The repunching is extremely strong, as the initial punching was simply way too low and is essentially touching the rim at the bottom of the coin, and the correction was obviously necessitated, leaving the entire lower third of the first mint mark still exposed towards the bottom, doubling the final S almost perfectly in this position. Additionally, the top serif of the initial S can still be seen just above the lower curve of the S as well. As with most of these, grade does play an important part in the coin's market value, but in 2019, an MS64 graded coin from PCGS was sold at auction for $312. The 1930 buffalo nickel is a veritable gold mine for variety collectors and cherry pickers alike. Both the San Francisco and Philly mint issues have a plethora of varieties just waiting to be discovered. One of these is one of the several known double-die obverse variety coins for the 1930 issue, primarily identified by the strong doubling that can be seen towards the southeast of the eyelid. Where this is differentiated from the other similar varieties for this date is the more extreme spread that is expressed by this doubling, where the whole eyelid is doubled, looking almost like a capital letter L that fell on its side or back, if that makes any sense. Although, to be completely fair, don't rely on this fact solely for identification, as the particular feature does tend to fade as the coin's dice state advances. By way of example, you can clearly see here this effect in 3 different coins, all of which in comparably high numerical grades, but moving from an earlier to a much later later dye state from left to right. You can also see the dye state expressed by the pitting and distress lines, as well as the slow deterioration of the letters in Liberty as well. Additional doubling is also found on the right side of the long vertical feather at the back, expressed towards the same extreme degree as the eyelid, although this feature does tend to stay largely consistent and is not so drastically affected by the dye state. In 2018, a coin like this, graded by PCGS as MS66 Plus, was sold at auction for $1,920. Another coin to look for from 1936 is, of course, the 1936D 3.5-legged buffalo nickel. This variety is extremely similar to the much more famous 1937D 3-legged buffalo coin, in that a portion of the front right leg is missing due to over-polishing of the die, although in this case a portion of the leg is still remaining, as opposed to the entire front leg being missing in the other coin, hence the 3.5 leg moniker. Oh, and I hesitate to even mention this for fear of perpetuating this nonsense, but there is an old wives' tale out there that says that this is the same reverse die used in both the 1936D 3.5-legged and 1937D 3-leg varieties. This is simply not true. There is no basis in reality or fact for this. They share no die markers, and it is purely a coincidence that this happened 2 years in a row. In terms of value though, in 2018 we saw a PCGS graded AU53 coin sold at auction for $5,050. So you can well imagine that if a mint state coin became valuable, and there are really only a handful listed in the population report, it could easily sell towards the upper range of $10,000 to $20,000. Variety from 1920, and hailing from the Denver Mint, this variety is incredibly scarce, with a mere 2 specimens being reflected in the population report. Identifying it is, however, relatively straightforward, as the initial mint mark was simply impressed directly towards the south of the final placement, leaving the base of the letter, including the lower serif, clearly visible below the final D, and you should even be able to detect the slight doubling of sorts towards the lower rounding of the D as well in most grades. With so few examples of this variety known, its visibility, or rather lack thereof, in the marketplace does pose the biggest challenge when it comes to attaining a fair price for the coin. However, given its overall scarcity and its inclusion in the latest copy of the Cherry Picker's Guide, it should be able to attain at least around $500 to even $1,000 at sale, depending on the coin's grade, of course. Our next example is from 1925, with the San Francisco Mint's S mint mark being the topic of discussion this time around. This coin is considerably more attainable than the previous example, as it has been a known variety for quite some time. In this case, the S mint mark is placed due west of the initial punching, and the most reliable way to spot the punching would be towards the right of the bottom rounding of the S, where it should be neatly doubled. The coin's relative condition doesn't really affect this particular aspect. However, the die state absolutely will, as per these examples, where the lower grade coin displays the repunching in a far stronger manner when compared to the higher grade example. All the same, in 2019, a PCGS graded XF40 example was sold at auction for $528, although again, by comparison, in 2015, a PCGS AU55 specimen was sold for $2,350. And then again, back towards the Denver Mint for a very attractive and quite bold repunched mint mark from 1915. In this case, the initial D was completely out of position, and literally touches and even deforms to a very slight degree the lower curve of the C of cents. The mintmark was then placed in its correct position, and as a result we now see complete separation of the initial and final mintmark, with the final mintmark shifted towards the southwest entirely. In 2019, an example was sold at auction, housed in a PCGS slab with the grade of AU58 for $630. A variety from 1915, and it is a fantastic double die variety. Not a very famous one to be sure, but that's probably down to the fact that it's just so incredibly rare. It does, however, beautifully demonstrate its class 4 doubling on the obverse. The offset on this coin happened slightly but almost directly towards the left, leaving very nice doubling towards the right on the protected areas of the eyelid, where the doubling is the most dramatic and can be seen towards the general southeast. Following that, we see similar doubling towards the nostril as well, and then the right of the general profile, including the tip of the nose as well as the lips, should be doubled in much the same manner as well. These points should be very clearly seen on all coins of this description, regardless of its condition, as these two examples can clearly demonstrate. In 2019, we saw a PCGS graded coin matching this description, slabbed as AU58, crossing the auction block for $1,320. And while we are in 1915, we might as well look at a very neat little repunched mintmark variety from this same year. Coming to us courtesy of the San Francisco Mint is the 1915 S over S coin. That's right, this is not just a repunched mintmark, but a triple punched mintmark. And the initial as well as the secondary impressions both took place directly towards the north and south of the final impression, the effect of which can be best spotted on the lower part of the S, where the thinnest part of the tail is especially effectively doubled towards both the top and the bottom. There should be some very nice doubling towards the serif, well, to all parts of the letter really, but it really is towards the bottom half of the mintmark where you should be able to spot this the easiest. This is actually quite a rare variety as well, and in 2015 a coin graded by PCGS as AU58 was sold at auction for $1,703. And well, we might as well continue with the general 1915 theme with our next coin known as the two feathers variety. As the name indicates, the general place of interest for this coin would be on the obverse portrait, specifically on the eponymous feathers. So normally what you would see on a coin like this are 3 feathers altogether, 2 larger ones and then just the tip of a third barely peeking out from behind his neck. On this variety, however, the third feather is missing. This is the result of the die being heavily abraded, and in fact on some coins you can actually see the polish lines where the feather once was. Also, I just feel that I should mention that the similar varieties are known for other dates as well, so I would advise that you check all of your coins for this just to be sure. In 2020, a very interesting example of this, graded by PCGS as MS66, was sold at the January Fun Show for $3,840. The Buffalo Nickel was designed by James Earl Frazier, an artist primarily known for his work as a sculptor, but he was also responsible for the designs of the World War I Victory Medal and the 1925 North American Medal as well. So, as the designer of the Buffalo nickel, he was therefore entitled to discreetly place his initials on said design. In this case, it is a small capital letter F just below the date on the obverse of the coin. However, on our current variety coin, that F is missing completely. There are some coins known with only a weak or potentially partially missing F as well, but in order to qualify for this FS 401 designation, there needs to be no trace of the F whatsoever, as seen in the current example. In 2021, a coin like this, graded and slabbed by PCGS with a grade of MS64, was sold at auction for $504. From there, we jump ahead nearly a decade, well, more than a decade really, to 1927, where the Denver Mint delivers a solid repunched mintmark variety for us to find. Technically, although a triple punched mintmark, as this is the 1927 D over D over D coin. The exact sequence is not certain, but it does seem that the initial D was placed far too low, or stated otherwisely, nearer to the rim. The second impression was then placed almost touching the letter E of 5, and then finally the mint mark was positioned in the, well, Goldilocks position where we see it now. The remnants of the first two punchings still being seen towards the top and the bottom of the D. In 2019, there was a coin, this time graded VF20, that appeared at auction that was sold for $144. 1919 hosts our next coin, and this time we are looking at a double die obverse example of the Buffalo nickel. This is a fairly recent discovery, relatively speaking, and considering that the series is, well, now over a century old. But back to the matter at hand. The doubling on this coin can be spotted on the date, particularly on the last number 9, which is labeled as the, well, veritable calling card of this variety. Furthermore, the tip of the large feather is also doubled. There is more minor doubling present elsewhere on the design as well, such as at the ends of the hair ribbon, for instance, but the main features are the ones already mentioned previously. During 2016, a variety matching this description was sold at auction, graded as PCGS MS64 for an astounding $12,925. The 1913 nickel has quite a few very nice varieties to look for, and the first of these that we will look at now is a double die reverse variety that is found on the Type 2 coin for this date. Though this variety can have the appearance of a Class 6 doubled coin, it is debatable whether this may or may not be rather a function of the die state of the specific coin that you're examining. As in an earlier die state, there is absolutely no question that this is in fact distorted hub doubling. And look no further than the letters of 5 cents to confirm this fact, which should also be your first port of call when searching for this coin. The telltale doubling is seen due south of all of the letters without fail. Similar doubling should then also be found on the letters of United States of America, all towards the rim of the coin, and this includes the dots separating the words as well. In 2019, a coin like this was sold at auction, housed in a PCGS slab with the grade of MS65 for $576. Then we move to a double die reverse example, also from 1913. This on a Type 2 Buffalo nickel, where the flaw in the original design was corrected, placing the words 5 cents in a recess below the buffalo. But the doubling is on the reverse, and is a classic example of distended or Class 6 hub doubling. The best effect displays on the numbers of the date, where there is no typical or classical doubling effect that can be found, but instead the numbers are all significantly thicker than they really should be. This is best exemplified when compared to a regular or a normal coin as seen here. A similar effect can then also be seen on the letters of liberty, but this is certainly not as pronounced or noticeable as it would be on the date of the coin, but can definitely be useful if the date is a little more worn down, as is such a pronounced problem with this series. In 2019, a coin like this was sold at auction graded as PCGS MS63 for $408. The next coin is once again a double die reverse for the 1913 nickel, but this time it is found on the Type 1 coin, where the denomination of 5 cents is seen on a raised mound underneath the buffalo. The doubling itself, though, is peculiar, as it is a first of a number of these coins where, rather counterintuitively, the Class 4 doubling is seen on the central devices and not on the details closer to the rim, as you would normally expect. Here, the first several letters of E pluribus display doubling towards the southeast, especially the P, the L, and the U, to a lesser extent. In 2018, a coin graded as PCGS MS65 was sold at auction for the amount of $3,600. Subscribe to WNN and activate notifications with the bell icon so you'll know when new videos are released. For the World Numismatic News, I am Numisman saying thank you for watching. Stay safe, keep collecting, and have a fantastic day.